Okay, now in this lecture, let's talk about what is a research question and what are some of the components of a research papers. Okay, now what is a research question? Well, it's really basically the objective of a study or a problem that needs to be solved through research. So it can be gaps in current knowledge that we don't know, and it could be something like the conditions that need to be improved, or it could be a technological limitation that needs some sort of breakthrough. Okay, now so these are all adequate reasons to perform a research question. Now, so for something like can immunity ever be achieved for the COVID-19 virus? That is a great research question, and that is something that is really imminent on everybody's mind right now. Okay, so and research question doesn't have to be something that is so profound. It could be something that you just kind of went through in your observation in life, and you just kind of think about, huh, I wonder if that is the case. So it could be as simple as something like, can drinking coffee make the attention better? Or it could be something as easily as, are people who are in love, are they more likely to smile more? Something, even something silly like that can be a research question. Okay. Okay, so now what is a study? Okay, so a study is basically a research question that really gave you a question, and then it pretty much attempts to solve that question as well. So a study can really be descriptive or hypothesis driven. Okay, now a descriptive study is usually trying to characterize a specific phenomena. So a descriptive study has nothing to do with hypothesis driven. It's just kind of trying to say that, okay, so for instance, I am wondering how many kinds of blood cells there are there. You're not really manipulating anything. You are trying to characterize or categorize something that is already in existence. Okay, now as opposed to the hypothesis-driven studies, this is basically trying to address a very specific problem. And then when there are hypothesis-driven studies, there are most likely some sort of manipulation that are used. Okay, so it could be something that's that you use some sort of manipulation, such as I am going to manipulate the amount of caffeine that you're going to drink. I am going to manipulate the amount of TV that you're going to watch. I am going to manipulate your happiness level, and I'm going to see if that affects memory. So hypothesis-driven studies are usually dealing with some sort of manipulation. And so that is what is going to make a true experiment. Okay, now what is a hypothesis? So it's something that is clear, testable, falsifiable, and serves as a basis for constructing the experiment. So this is basically your prediction. Okay, so let's go back to our caffeine and attention example. So the hypothesis that you would have is I predict that drinking more coffee is going to make a person more alert, and therefore their uh, score that is uh, on this their score on an attention test is going to be higher. But when a person drinks too much caffeine, and then you need to define what is too much. For instance, maybe 5 cups of regular coffee or more, and then this is going to create a counterproductive um, measurement in the attention, in which that the attention is actually going to become worse the more caffeine that they consume. So that would be a very clear, testable, falsifiable hypothesis. Okay, now the findings from these experiments can then serve as the basis to accept or reject the hypothesis. So you need to, so the only way that you can accept or reject the hypothesis is to look at the data or the results that you got, and then see if the data supports your hypothesis or it does not support the hypothesis. Okay, and now something I want to say in psychology is that you can never prove or disprove something, because psychology wise you are basically dealing with something called a construct. Okay, which is something we're going to talk about later, but construct is something that cannot be directly measured but rather can only kind of tap into. Okay, so this is not like the physical science where 1 ounce of gold weighs 1 ounce. You know, it weighs exactly the same as 1 ounce of water. You know, something like that. It's not something like that. In psychology, we're measuring something called a construct, and then it could be something like memory, attention, emotions, happiness, fear. And so these are the aspects of psychology that we are trying to measure. And then these are not directly measurable, and therefore these are something called a construct. We'll talk about more about it later. Okay. Okay. Now let's talk about some sort of variables. So now, as you remember from statistics, variables are basically they can be independent variable or can be dependent variable, right? Now something we're going to talk about something new, and that's something called the median variable. Okay, so basically a median variable is when a stimulus causes a response, it does so by changing something inside the organism. So for instance, if you are listening to some kind of music, for instance, let's say Ariana Grande or Lady Gaga or something that you are listening and you're like, oh, I am so hyped up after hearing this music. And that is because something in that music triggered your body that's going inside, perhaps let's say more adrenaline, more dopamine, or more serotonin, that is putting you in a better mood. And that trigger variable is the mediating variable. So let's put it this way. So if there is a drug that can block these hormones that is what neurotransmitters that is in your body, and then you are listening to exactly the same music and you're probably thinking, oh, that's so weird. I'm listening to exactly this music that I used to love, but I am not getting any hyped about it. And the mediating variable in this case are the hormones or the neurotransmitters that the music is triggering that is making you feeling a certain way. Okay, so you can kind of think of mediating variables as the variable that is over here that is causing some sort of physiological changes, and that is giving you a result. So the results in the example I gave you before would be something like a hyped up feeling. Okay, and I'll give you another example. So for instance, caffeine, when you consume caffeine or through drinking coffee, this is going to create certain neurological receptors. So this is going to inhibit something called the adrenaline receptor. And what happens is that when you have deactivated adrenaline receptor, this is going to cause decreased fatigue. So in other words, if there is a certain way to kind of neutralize this adenosine receptor in which that the caffeine will not downgrade the adenosine receptor, then it doesn't really matter how much caffeine or coffee that you drink or you consume, it's not going to cause a decreased fatigue. So you can see that these mediating variables are really the middleman when it comes to the actual feeling that it's giving you. Okay, so that's what mediating variable is. Okay, now what is a moderating variable? Well, moderating variable is a variable that intensifies, weakens, negates, or reverses the relationship between two other variables. So the example I give you here is that wearing perfume gets you like more if you're a woman, but if you're a man that you're wearing exactly the same perfume, for instance, maybe like a rose flavored perfume. So the girls, when they wear this lovely um, rose flavored perfume, you know, it's going to girls gonna say, oh, you smell so good, and the guy's gonna say, "Oh, yeah, you smell very beautiful or very sexy." But if a guy wearing exactly the same perfume, they are going to get, well, disliked by other people, because that's just socially not as acceptable. So in this case, the gender is actually the moderator variable. So you can see that the the gender in this case is really reversing the relationship between the two other variables. Okay, it's affecting the amount that you get liked. Okay. Another example you can get here is, for instance, uh, if a person comes to class versus a person who does not come to class, and then it doesn't really matter. So a person who comes to class, you can see that the more they study, the the more they study, the better the grade that they got, right? But then the person who does not come to class, it doesn't really matter how much they study, they improve just a little bit. So over here, whether coming to class or not really has an effect on the hours of studying in a week. So this is an example of an enabling relationship. Okay, so in other words, not coming to class negated the effect of studying because you have no idea what you're studying on, because you're not being very effective or very efficient when it comes to studying. Okay. Okay, now functional relationships. So this is the extent to which changes in one variable are accompanied by another. So basically, this is when you have going from one level of the independent variable to another level of the independent variable. So the example they give you here is drinking 1 cup of coffee increases focus and attention. Drinking 2 cups of coffee increase focus and attention even more. However, when you start drinking 3 or 4 cups of coffee, this is going to lead to inattention because the anxious feeling usually accompanied with a caffeine high. So this is something that we have said before when we are making our predictions. And let's say if the data supports our prediction, this is exactly the kind of pattern of data that we will be seeing. Okay, and then this is just what it would look like in graphical terms. Okay, so you can see that when the person drinks 1 cup of coffee, their concentration level increase. When they drink another cup of coffee, their concentration level increase even more. But then when they drink more, you can see that this starts to plateau, and when they drink even more, 2 to 4 cups of coffee, you actually see a reversal effect when it comes to their attention level, because you can see that this caffeine is now having exactly the opposite effect when you are going from 0 to 2, and then but when you go from 3 to 5, you can see this effect is being reversed. Okay, so this will be a functional relationship, and in this case what we are seeing is a inverted U or inverted V sort of pattern data, and you can see that this is not a linear relationship, but rather this is some sort of a quadratic relationship. Okay. Okay, now let's talk about what is a research proposal. Well, a research proposal is a prospectus that allows the institution to kind of evaluate the adequacy of the research before the research is complete. Okay, and so when it comes to the proposal, you want to introduce the idea of kind of saying why it is so important to have this research being done. Okay, so because if it's something that doesn't have a lot of significance, it's not worth being funded. Okay, so let's say if you're saying that I want to do some of research saying why my dog and cat fight all the time, and you're asking for $1 million to do this kind of research, well, school or any kind of funding agency is not going to give you that kind of money because they just don't think that, while it's an interesting question, but it's only interesting to a very limited number of people, and that would be you and your family. But it does not really affect a lot of people out there. Now, as opposed to if you are doing something that really affects a lot of humankind, for instance, you are interested in knowing how a person acquires immunity to the COVID-19 virus, and that so and then what kind of drugs can accelerate that. Well, then that would be a great and very important question, especially now given the current state of affair. You can kind of say that this is going to really carry a lot of significance, which is really warrants some sort of funding. Okay, and then so what you want to talk about is you want to introduce basically what we know about a certain subject so far. Okay, and then you want to introduce a problem and such as why such research should be done. So for instance, the limitation of the previous research, what it gaps in knowledge and so forth. Okay, and then you want to offer the solution, then you want to state the hypothesis. Okay, so that's an introduction section. And then you want to talk about the methods of the proposal, and then you want to kind of say, so in the methods of the proposal, it's basically saying how you are going to conduct the research. Okay, what are the equipments, participants, what is the testing environment you're going to do? So, and you can see that this approach is very similar to something that you are going to be writing in your lab report. But what the only thing that's different is that a proposal is you are talking it as if you are going to do it in the future. But a lab report in Psychology 213W, what you guys will be doing is you guys are writing it after the fact that it has already been conducted. Okay. Okay. And now something I want to kind of talk about, and that is the double blind technique. And then, so doing research, you want to make sure that your approach, well, especially when you are in your methods, you want to make sure that you want to improve the fact that you are not being swayed because you are the person who came up with the hypothesis, right? And then therefore you may be biased to wanting some sort of results to kind of prove that you are correct. So therefore, you need to blind the experimenter to influence this effect of the expectation. Okay, so that's blinding the researcher. And another ways that you should do it is you should blind the subject, okay? Because the subjects, once they kind of know that, oh, they are getting some sort of special treatment, they're going to create something called the demand characteristics. And that is actually going to sway their behavior as well. So the gold standard in this case is something called the double blind technique. And this is the strategy for improving validity, construct validity specific, that involves making sure that neither the participant or the researcher, that's why it's called double blind. So one part is on the participant part, another part is on the researcher part that has direct contact with the participant, know the treatment of the participant is received. Okay, so it also protects the internal validity. So because when the experimenter doesn't know the kind of drugs that the participants are receiving, then this protects the internal validity by limiting the experimenter effect. Okay. Okay. So the double blind technique, it limits the experimental effect, as we've said, and then it also limits the demand characteristic. So what is demand characteristic? Well, it is basically the participants finding out that they are in a special group, such as the treatment or the experimental group, and they're not in the control group, and then therefore their behavior start to change as a result. And that is definitely a big no-no. Okay, so this is why it's really important to have double blind technique to really make sure that you limit the experimental effect as well as limit the demand characteristic that's coming from the participant side. Okay, and okay, now next part, we want to talk about the results of the proposal. So you want to talk about what are basically what would be the expected results in the case that your hypothesis is supported. And you also want to talk about alternatively what happens when the hypothesis is rejected, and then what would that mean in the context of the research, okay? And how you would further refine your next proposal's hypothesis to kind of fit into the data that you have gathered in this case, okay? And the last part you want to talk about is the discussion. And this is going to be usually very short. And then because your research hasn't been conducted yet, as opposed to the laboratory reports that you guys are going to be writing in your lab number 2 and 3, is that you are going to write a rather lengthy discussion because there are issues that you want to talk about before you well, no, sorry. There are issues you want to talk about after the fact that you have already done it, conducted experiments, and then you kind of want to evaluate what can be improved for future studies. This is what the whole discussion is about. Okay. All right. So I think we're going to conclude this part of the lecture right here. If there are any questions, please feel free to put them out in the discussion board, and then and we can really have an open chat in there.